G'day everyone, and welcome back to our Hidden Gems webinar series. As we kick off 2022, we're coming to you live from Byron Bay today, with markets and volumes expected to be back to normal next week, as we kind of all head back to the new normal of working again through COVID. Now, this year we look forward to introducing you again to lots of new companies and, of course, some of our old favourites. And we'll get on board some investment professionals to talk market and new investment themes. Now, if you have some suggestions for companies you'd like to see or how we can do things better, please reach out via the ShareCafe website. And don't forget to ask questions in the green box provided. We know that CEOs always see this as an important part of the webinar format. Okay, let's make a start. First up, we have Taurian Resources, market cap around 37 million, 1 year return of up 25%. I think they're probably up 40% since January. We have with us the Executive Director, Peretz Shapiro. Now, the company is a highly active gold exploration and development company with an extensive and strategic land holding comprising 6 projects. Peretz, thanks for your time. Over to you.
Thank you, Tim, for having me this morning. It's great to be here, and it's a really exciting time for Taurian. We'll go through this presentation fairly quickly, and so we can have as much time as possible for questions. In brief, Taurian, as Tim's mentioned, we are a highly active gold explorer in the Leonora region of the goldfields in WA, which that itself is really helpful for us in the sense that it's a region that is well endowed with gold. Obviously a significant infrastructure in the area, and the best place to make a large discovery is next to some other previously large discoveries, and that's what we have. I will touch on something else which we've recently announced to the market, which is a rare earth opportunity which we've recently uncovered about a week ago. But all in all, in general, our company's major focus and what we've been doing over the last 50 months in particular is, as an exploration company, we have not stopped exploring. We are committed to the ground, to the project that we have, and we are really excited about what we have, and we are going to continue into the future to explore and drill and provide a benefit to our shareholders, and share price appreciation hopefully will follow as we have incredible amount of news flow to follow during that exploration campaign. Move to the next slide. This is an overview of our management team. It's a really good mix of both age, experience, particularly experience across both legal, corporate, and technical experience on our board, on our exploration manager, Claudia Zegas as well, being highly experienced in the region and has already made some significant discoveries for Taurian. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Overview of our company. There's our top 10 shareholders, of course, our market cap, and you can have a look at our share price down there in the graph. So we'll talk a lot about our flagship project today. That's what we're going to be focusing on, and that is the Mount Sterling Gold Project. So it comprises about 74 kilometers of tenure. Again, just about a 25-minute, half an hour drive northwest of Leonora. It's, as you can see, it's surrounded particularly by Red 5 and in particular the King of the Hills, the 4 million ounce King of the Hills mine, which is apparently coming online later this year and will start production. In terms of Taurian ourselves, we so far have uncovered 2 resources on the northern part of the project, being the Mount Sterling resource for about 102,000 ounces, and the Mount Sterling Well resource for about 16,000 ounces, which have been announced previously. The Mount Sterling resource in particular in May last year. Since then, there's been considerable amount of drilling, and we are well advanced in our 17,000 meter drill program and have received really good results so far to date. If you want to have a look at that, I won't go through the specifics of those announcements per se. And what you would find is that we continue to be consistently hitting really decent grades, which is above the average grade that we find for our neighbors and our peers in the region. So that's really promising. And that bodes really well for the global resource update, which is due around the end of this quarter, drilling permitting, and we are making really good progress on the drilling program. So we are anticipating to deliver that resource on time by the end of the quarter. We also have some really high-grade historical mines as well in the Diorite region, and that is the southern part of the project. And we've uncovered a number of high-grade results and high-grade intercepts there as well. And we'll continue to do some exploration there too. So there's a lot of upside here, as you can see, with some great ground, some well-established in a well-established region, and we are just getting started in developing what we believe is a district-level gold project. So as I had mentioned earlier, there was an announcement last week which talked about a prospective rare earth target that Torian has. Now, obviously, from a macro perspective, the rare earth market has really been heating up over the last year or so due to supply shortages, and obviously the demand for rare earth has also significantly increased with all the utilities that it does have. So what was uncovered actually was quite interesting. We have a very methodical and systematic exploration process which takes place throughout our tenure, and that is we do some we've acknowledged and we've realized that there's a high correlation between arsenic and gold in our tenure. And what we've done is we've had exploration. We've used PXRF to analyze soils for arsenic levels, and we've done that all over our tenure, and that's why we've come up with 5 or 6 new gold targets over the last year or so. So we're doing this around this area on the Arctic fault, and yeah, we found some decent arsenic values. We then followed up with some auger vacuum drilling, and when our exploration manager actually walked the ground later on, having a background in heavy rare earth, looked at the ground and realized actually it looks, just from what he could see, there was a lot more going on. So going back to the data and having a look at what the XRF numbers were when it came to yttrium as a pathfinder for rare earth, we had some significant yttrium anomalies, which warranted really warranted for us to look further into that. So what was uncovered, there was over about 1 kilometer at least, that's since been expanded since then as we've continued to go over that data, and we're looking to now extend that over about 2 to 3 kilometers over the coming weeks. The auger vacuum drilling, which had taken place looking for gold specifically, was then submitted for multi-element assays as well, wherever we had high yttrium anomalies. So interestingly, the auger vacuum drilling was done specifically over what was the larger surface arsenic anomalies. So we are going to be following up with more auger vacuum drilling specifically over the larger yttrium anomaly. So there's a lot more to come in this story, and we're excited to see it play out. And we're anticipating the first round of results to come before the end of this month. And the exciting part is this is on the Arctic fault, which has a strike continuity of about 16 kilometers. So this rare earth discovery has really come out of nowhere and surprised us pleasantly. And subject to the results over the next week or so, we're looking forward to really uncovering what we might have, and it's really exciting for us. So we want to move to the next slide to talk about the gold exploration which we've been doing. So we're doing it in total. We're in the middle of a 17,500 meter campaign, of which we've already drilled about 80 holes so far out of about 150. So about halfway through this current drilling campaign. So there's a number of areas that we're targeting. Obviously, the most important one here is to expand the existing Mount Sterling resource. It's currently 102,000 ounces, 20,000 of which are indicated. We're looking to increase the amount that is indicated significantly, and also continue to expand that resource, both particularly along strike, and that remains open at the moment. The interim resource last year only included about 740 meters of strike. We've now identified that this system extends at least 1.2 kilometers. So there's a lot of work that we've been doing, and we've consistently been getting some really good results. And we're looking for a significant increase come the last quarter of this year. Later this quarter, I should say. So I want to move to the next slide. And as we move northeast of the Mount Sterling Viserion resource, which is a subvertical system, we've identified what's the Skywing system to the east, which is more a horizontal system, or flat lodes, as we found. So it's small but higher grade lodes, which essentially add width to our gold system. Obviously, that's really helpful when it comes to prospective shallow open pittable mines as we look into the future. And we're continuing to see that this system, the Mount Sterling Viserion, continues to the east at Skywing, and it will continue further east as well, as we'll discuss soon, as well as further northwest. We're continuing to get some good results from Skywing, and that's really adding that oxide gold, the shallow gold, and it's adding width to what is a really important, which is really important as we uncover this system. Move on to the next slide. Hydra. So this is a target which lies about 1 or 2 kilometers northwest of Mount Sterling Viserion, along strike as well. That remains open at quite a lengthy strike length. So again, this was uncovered using that XRF and auger vacuum technique, which I discussed earlier, which we've since discovered primary gold at Hydra, and we've, as part of this campaign so far, and we'll continue to follow up that as we recognize that that is a potential piece of this puzzle of not just being Mount Sterling Viserion on its own, but the extent to which it goes kilometers to the northwest and kilometers to the east as well. It's a really, really exciting piece of this puzzle that we have. The next slide, please. Tyrannus, so that sits to the east. That's that colorful area in the middle of that image. And Mount Sterling Viserion, the 102,000 ounce resource, and that we've got currently is to the west there, and that's that red line. So, and Skywing, as we discussed earlier, is in the middle. So you can see here how it all plays out. Tyrannus, importantly, lies on the Ursus fault. It's a highly prolific fault, and there's just further south of that position of Tyrannus, along that fault line, we've got the, Red 5 have a couple of significant deposits, significant resources, gold resources sitting there along that fault as well. So at Tyrannus, again, we've discovered primary gold at a pretty decent grade, again, a little bit higher than the average of our region. So this really is a really exciting picture. And yes, we're looking at it now as individual targets, but I would not be surprised if down the line, this all merges into something really, really significant as one large system. And Sterling Well is again to the southwest of Sterling Viserion. That it has an existing resource of about 16,000 ounces. We did a drilling campaign there last year where gold was identified beyond the boundaries of the current resource, both at strike and at depth. We're going to be following up drilling there as part of this campaign as we look to increase the resource there, as that adds to our global resource altogether. And diorite, as I described earlier, that's that really high-grade historical mine, or many historical mines down to the south of Mount Sterling. Again, there we've had some significant discoveries, particularly at the unexpected mine, as it's called. As you can see some of the numbers there on the screen. And again, as part of this program, we're going to be following up some additional holes there. So overall, as part of our 17,500 meter program, so far we've drilled about 75 holes, of which 50 to 60 have been reported on. We still have about 20 holes or so that have yet to be reported on, in addition to 50 that's yet to be drilled. And that will all continuously be announced over the coming months as we head towards our resource, and as we continue to drill beyond that, as we continue to grow the company system. This slide again discusses that exploration strategy, which I talked about earlier. It's available on our website, available through ShareCafe as well, if you want to look into that deeper. That concludes the presentation. If we have time for 1 or 2 questions, Tim.
We do, thanks, Perez. It appears you're kind of spoilt for choice, and you've spoken about an increase in drilling activity. So what can we expect in terms of meterage and number of holes drilled? And you know, you got AV drilling, which is kind of the shallow drilling, which kind of helps drill through soil cover, and it's almost like soil sampling, against the kind of heavier RC drilling, which helps you find a resource. So how do you balance out that kind of AV drilling program when it looks like you've got plenty of opportunities for your RC drilling?
Sure. So the auger vacuum drill, at the moment, we're going to have, well, starting, I think, early next week, we'll have 3 RC rigs on site. And we have an auger vacuum rig, which is constantly there about 2 or 3 weeks of every month. The AV rig is more for target generation. So it drills until the hard rock. And then we sample the last meter, or wherever we have a significant arsenic anomaly, we'd look at sampling that, or we'd look at sending that off for assays. The RC drilling is obviously then used to follow up on what the work, the auger vacuum drilling. So that way, our RC drilling is a lot more targeted, and we're able to maximize that. Obviously, it's a lot more expensive than auger vacuum drilling. We want to make sure that when we're putting those RC holes in the ground, we're doing that in the most cost-effective and getting the biggest bang for our buck. In terms of the program, we're halfway through a 17,500 meter program at the moment. And those holes that I mentioned, those are all RC holes. Auger vacuum is sitting on top of that.
And time for two more, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Were you happy with the rate at which you added ounces over the last 12 months? Can we expect the new drilling program to be focused on some of the known high-grade zones? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So we had our interim resource earlier last year, and then it's back in, I think it came out in May. Since then, there was more results that came out of that system, and we've had continuously positive results throughout this program. And as I said, we're looking to increase ounces. What that final number is, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's looking good. The average grade is looking good. The fact that we'll be able to increase the confidence of the resource, and it is something which we're very confident about, mind the pun. And moving forward, we're really excited about what we have. We've also done a lot of work on target generation. When we had that resource estimate in May last year, we didn't really have any other targets aside for where we had the resource. Since that, we spent quite a bit of time on target generation. So not only are we looking at increasing our resource, but there's a number of other targets in close proximity, which may all merge into one. But now we've done a lot of that grunt work, which is not as sexy per se to the market, but that's enabled us now to use that RC drill and really develop our ground moving forward.
And Pretz, finally, just quickly, your cash position. I know you have some options expiring, 2 cent options. I think your stock's 3.5 cents. 2 cent options expiring at the beginning of February. Can you give us an update on your cash position?
Sure. So we're sitting at about $1.5 million in cash at the moment. And we have about $5 million worth of options that are going to be expiring in the beginning of February. Our share price, as you mentioned, is about 3.5 cents. Those options are 2 cents. So we anticipate the majority of those options will be exercised, and that will obviously help our cash balance significantly moving forward.
Great, Pretz. That's all we have time for. Nice to see you again. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Tim. Take care. All the best.
Okay, next up we have LBT Innovations, ASX code, of course, LBT. Market cap around $37 million, a flat 1-year return. The company is a groundbreaking designer of advanced technology solutions for the medical industry. We have with us Brent Barnes, who is both the CEO and Managing Director. Brent, thanks for your time. Welcome back. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Tim, and Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. Look, it's been a pretty busy time for us. We had a great announcement over the Christmas New Year period in terms of acquiring our joint venture company. I'll talk about that in a little bit of time. But jumping right into it, the space that we operate is clinical microbiology, specifically this issue of infectious diseases. So an example of infectious disease is something like a urinary tract infection. Many people have probably heard of that. Over 150 million of these UTIs occur every year here in Australia, and that kind of represents about $1 billion of cost to the Australian healthcare economy. The other kind of part of this infectious diseases is the rise of superbugs. So these are infectious diseases that are resistant to antibiotics, or in other words, they're just not treatable. And so it's a really serious issue, this one. And the space that we operate in is a really exciting one. And it's absolutely ripe for disruption and desperate for automation. Looking at the next slide in terms of the market opportunity, this global issue of infectious diseases being increasing translates to obviously a large market opportunity, which as I said before, is really ripe for automation. Our customers are clinical microbiology laboratories all over the world. So think of laboratories that are in a large hospital setting, in addition to those private labs such as Sonic Healthcare, which is a fairly well-known brand here in Australia. what we've done is segmented the market globally. So not every single clinical lab is a potential customer for our product, but it's those medium and those large labs. And there are about 13,000 of those globally. But if we look at just focusing on the markets that we've launched in globally already in Australia, US, and Europe, that represents a market or addressable market of over 2,000 labs. And you can see some numbers on the screen here. As we get the penetration rolling through that, it represents a fairly significant sales opportunity for our product. And on our product, the next slide talks about how we are absolutely leading the way in digital microbiology. There is no one else who is providing this level of automation such as we are. And so what we've done is developed a system we called the Automated Plate Assessment System, or APAS for short. It's a single instrument, but importantly, it's able to read multiple of these infectious diseases. So I mentioned the UTI as an example at the start. So that's urine screening, obviously. But not only that, we also have another module for MRSA, which is the screening of golden staph. I mentioned superbugs. We're also working on a module that looks to identify antibiotic resistant organisms. And so it's this suite of infectious diseases. We've got a single product, multiple analysis modules. That's the software that we've developed. And we've gone through all of this process of clinical trials, burden of proof, getting those regulatory clearances in place. And from a commercial perspective, we've sold 6 already around the world, and importantly, appointed leading channel partners who have put their brand behind our APAS technology. The next slide talks a bit about our cutting edge kind of AI platform. Like I said, no one else is doing what we are doing, and our AI algorithm is patent protected. The whole, we've got a family of 4 patents around this thing. It's protected, and I think the picture on the slide here is a really great representation of how APAS works. So we're clearly taking a photo of the plate, and what we've done is that we've trained the algorithm to interpret the various colonies and look to separate the detection of various colonies, which is what the bottom part of that image there on the screen looks to do. And it's super exciting, and like I said, completely unique. In terms of the clinical proof, well, that's been done. And so the technology works. It's at least as accurate. In fact, our clinical studies show it's more accurate than a scientist, and we're able to do it also 3 times faster. Next slide talks about kind of the roadmap and the journey that we've been on. It's been a long journey. We've been at this for about 10 years now. But I think importantly for investors looking at this from a value perspective now, it's a significant de-risked value opportunity. The important regulatory clearances are in place. You have to get a regulatory clearance in order to sell your product. We have a commercial product. We've generated commercial sales already. More recently, we've done the heavy lifting in terms of appointing key opinion leaders in Australia, the US, and in Europe. And we've gone through an extensive due diligence process with giant organizations, Beckman Coulter and Thermo Fisher, who've ultimately assessed the technology, assessed the market opportunity, and have signed up to be partners of ours. And so really the key message here is that we've established those critical building blocks from both the technology and even this early commercialization element to be able to start generating some real benefit for our customers and also for our shareholders. Talking about Thermo Fisher and Beckman Coulter, these are large global giants. And importantly, they are household names for our customers. So their brand reputation and the trust that our customers have with them is just impossible for us to replicate. And it's always been part of our strategy, in fact, to appoint distributors in each of our key regions. In both cases, you can see the picture kind of demonstrates the fact that our product is complementary within their existing portfolio of microbiology products. And that's really important because you look at these big companies that get appointed as distribution partners, and there's many examples of where we struggle to keep the focus. But in this case, it's a complementary product within their existing portfolio, and therefore they're really motivated to sell APAS. This next slide talks about this transformative acquisition, which I mentioned at the start. I'm really, really excited to announce that we have acquired a joint venture company that we own 50% of. We now own 100% of the company. And think of it really as though we're kind of buying back 100% of our own product, our own technology, at really what is the perfect time. I've had discussions with many shareholders and potential investors over the years who've told me they didn't like the structure of a JV. It's complex, and really, frankly, many of them are known to fail. Well, in this case, our JV hasn't failed. Our JV partner has now invested significantly in LBT through the issuing of predominantly shares, and look to benefit in the upside on a go-forward basis. But importantly, the structure is simplified, and from a financial perspective, we're now getting 100% of those revenues, and importantly, look to improve our time to cash flow break even, a really critical building block milestone. Next slide talks about this 2,000 lab addressable market, and it kind of puts that global footprint on the one page, and demonstrates that we've got Beckman Coulter working for us in Europe, and we've got Thermo Fisher working for us in the US. We've established key opinion leaders, and that's so important. And we've got a key opinion leader in each of those regions, so we're out there advocating for our product. And we've also now got the backing of Thermo Fisher and Beckman Coulter behind us. We've got a sales cycle that's a long one. It's typically over 12 months. And so what we've recently introduced this last quarter is a metric of an advanced sales opportunity. And this indicates that the customer is at a point where they're going through a product evaluation, or they're at the contracting phase of that sales process. And the intention here is to show our shareholders that we're making progress in the market, where we're seeing actually improved sales velocity of those opportunities, and noting that the sales cycle is a long one, but we're active and we're making progress, and the feedback from customers remains really positive. The next slide looks at our share graph and kind of our corporate overview. We're primarily a retail shareholder. We've had a fairly stable top 20 for some time now, and post-acquisition, we'll have about 6.4 million in the bank. That includes the 800,000 for the R&D tax incentive. And importantly, the slightly increased quarterly cash burn excludes all revenues, excludes all sales. So it represents our most conservative, or if you like, worst case position. And obviously, as sales progress, that cash runway further extends. So look, wrapping things up, there really is no better time to be in microbiology diagnostics. I think we've seen with COVID and the labs that have been difficult to get into over the last 12 to 18 months, just because everyone's distracted with COVID testing, there's an absolute need for automation in these laboratory systems. And while we're not a virus, we're not a product in the virology space, so we haven't got a COVID application. What we are absolutely seeing from our customers is more interest, and recognizing the need that there are limited skills. So we have a skills shortage, and we need automation. And APAS is perfect for this infectious diseases space that we're operating in. If we look over the next kind of 12 months, we are going to deliver on additional capability, which is going to further increase the clinical utility of the instrument. We're going to build on the sales that we've already delivered to date in a more opportunistic way through the Thermo Fisher and Beckman Coulter relationships. And not only that, now that we've got 100% ownership of this joint venture company, Clever Culture Systems, we do that receiving 100% of those proceeds. So look, it's a really attractive opportunity and investment thesis, I think, for shareholders to consider at this point.
Thanks, Brent. Always a good presentation from you, always bang on time. Congratulations on that acquisition, because I do know what it's like when you own kind of half an asset. So it's a cleaner structure for institutional shareholders in particular. Can you give us a little bit of color on what your customer currently uses by way of a product, how your pricing compares to peers, and at what point do you get to break even? How many machines do you have to sell, for example?
Yeah, no, good loaded question there. I'll start by what's the current standard of care? Well, everywhere around the world, you have a scientist that is looking at these culture plates manually. So there is some systems, big systems that provide some imaging, but still requires the microbiologist to look at it on a screen. But predominantly in most labs all around the world, you have someone sitting at a workbench, picking up a plate and visually looking at it and keying all the information into the laboratory information management system. And so that's where we saw there was an unmet need, right? Because it's a hugely manual process. And really interestingly, you look at things like MRSA, which is the staph identification, you have a really high negativity rate. So about 97% of all of these routine swabs for MRSA are negative. And so you've got someone looking at this plate, really, going through what is something that's fairly routine. Talking around other products that are in the market, we don't directly compete, but there's another product which is a total lab automation solution, and these are kind of $5 million plus instruments. Ours is $300,000 US, so it's a significantly different kind of category of lab. They're for the super large labs, and they provide automation of the front end inoculation and streaking. They image the plate, but they still require the scientist to look at that plate on a screen. So there's no automatic release of images, and then there's some ID/AST. And so we really stand alone from a competitive perspective in the space that we operate. Your last point around break even, look, it's a really good question. We haven't put forward kind of forward-looking forecasts around our sales process. And so, look, it's a difficult one for me to kind of ask, to answer succinctly, other than obviously by receiving 100% of the proceeds for the instrument and the analysis modules. So there's the upfront 300,000, and then there's an annuity over the useful life of the instrument, represents a higher earnings, which we expect, like I said in the presentation, to get us to a break-even point quicker.
And obviously that is expensive. 300,000 sounds like it's a lot cheaper than the competitors. But is there pricing plans put in place in terms of for payment of those sort of products?
Yes, yeah, there is. Look, we had them before the appointment of Thermo Fisher and Beckman Coulter in terms of leasing models and the like. And I think it's reasonable to assume that both of those organizations have a number of financing and procurement options and master services agreements with large organizations in Europe as well as the US that allow that upfront CapEx to be one that can be overcome as we start kind of generating placements in these regions. And that's why that advanced sales opportunity metric that we're trying to inform shareholders is really important, because it represents a really high likelihood of a sale conversion occurring. The challenge that we have is just the procurement cycle when the budgets are unlocked, and we're seeing some variability of that as COVID kind of goes through these peaks and troughs in various countries globally.
And can you give us a little bit more color? There's a group of questions based on margins and how that margin is potentially diluted when you work with distribution partners.
Yeah, so clearly we want to pass on some margin to the distributors. They need to be incentivized to give incentives to their sales team. I think broadly speaking, you can kind of think at 300,000 end user price, it's kind of like a third. Rough, very, very broad numbers. It's probably a bit better than that from our end margin perspective, but in simple terms, that's probably the easiest way to look at it.
And a question here on Sonic Healthcare, which you mentioned. Are they looking to purchase additional equipment? Is there a further opportunity with them?
Look, we're really close with Sonic, who are headquartered here in Australia, in Sydney. And so we have discussions with their global team. And look, we sold 2 instruments to their key lab in London last year, the Health Services Laboratory. So they're a really prestigious lab in London. They purchased 2 instruments. So we certainly see Sonic as a great opportunity, and that initial placement there in London has allowed us to have conversations with their other labs on a global scale.
And finally, Brent, there's a question here. In your recent AGM presentation, you said that technology and partners will drive greater market adoption. Can you elaborate a little bit more and give investors a taste of what to expect in 2022 RE sales and sales growth?
Yeah, look, all I'll say, we're going to do better than we did last year from a sales perspective. We know that investors are now really trying, with these building blocks that we've delivered, with the distributors being in place, now with 100% ownership of the joint venture, we know that shareholders want to see sales. All I can say is that, look, we have a really positive outlook for 2022, and we certainly appreciate that shareholders, once they start seeing some sales, that'll be a real catalyst, we believe, to build a momentum and positivity in the words that we've been saying for some time. So watch this space.
Great, Brent. There's quite a few more questions we don't have time for. If you've got time, you could answer them live. But thanks again. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. All the best.
Next up, we have AdAlta, ASX code 1AD, market cap around $24 million. 1-year return of -40%. We have with us the CEO and Managing Director, Tim Oldham. The company is an innovative clinical, just going to move this out of the way, clinical stage biotech company developing a unique range of new drug treatments. Tim, nice to see you again. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having us today. Just a quick summary of where Adalta is up to right now. As Tim mentioned, we're a drug discovery and development company. Our mission in life is to create therapeutics that improve the health of our patients. And we do this using our iBody platform, which is our drug discovery tool. And we believe this is a novel way of creating therapeutics against targets that traditional antibody approaches have struggled with. We've so far created 4 assets from that platform, 2 that we wholly own in the field of fibrosis and inflammation. The lead asset is 8214, which has completed phase 1 clinical studies and is being prepared for phase 2 in a disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And we've just started discovery on our second target in that same space. And then we have 2 co-development collaborations with other biopharmaceutical companies. The first is with GE Healthcare to develop novel PET imaging agents for immuno-oncology. That's as a preclinical stage asset. And the final one is a collaboration with Adelaide company Carina Biotech to develop iBody-enabled, what we call CAR T cell therapies. And this is at discovery stage. So with 4 programs in the pipeline, this is double what we had a year ago. We are continuing to build out that pipeline because every asset is additional value. We're aiming to have 10 programs in various stages of development by 2023. And to progress that, we just completed a $3.75 million placement just before Christmas with a $2.2 million entitlement offer running at the moment, closing on the 31st of January. So that's the nuts and bolts of who we do, but really to get a handle on how we create value, it's useful to think about what impact we're having on healthcare. What benefit are we providing to our customers who are, while ultimately are a patient, ultimately in the near term are pharmaceutical companies who are going to license or co-develop assets with us. And there are 4 areas we're thinking about today. Firstly is the realization that antibodies actually can't do everything. They revolutionized pharmaceuticals 30 odd years ago when they arrived, but there are still a whole bunch of drug targets that they've struggled to provide the same degree of specificity and impact on. And iBodies are specifically designed and focused on those areas where antibodies have struggled. The second area we're working on is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. This is a degenerative and fatal disease with no good therapies today. And we have a first-in-class, means a new mechanism of action to meet a desperate need for new approaches to this debilitating disease. The third area of impact is in immuno-oncology. So, these are the checkpoint inhibitor drugs. Many of you may be familiar with, Jared Roughhead and Ron Walker, who successfully battled cancer for extended periods of time, still surviving in Jared's case. Through these new immuno-oncology drugs. The problem is that only 20 to 40% of people respond, and our collaboration with GE Healthcare is designed to create an imaging agent that can help us work out who those responders are much earlier, get them onto the right drugs much faster, and improve outcomes. And then finally, we're working on CAR T cell therapies. These have revolutionized treatment for patients with blood cancers who failed multiple lines of chemotherapy. What we're trying to do with Carina Biotech is create iBody-enabled CAR T cells that offer the same hope for patients with solid tumours. Now, I'd love to talk about all 4 of these areas, but we don't have time for that today, so I'm just going to focus on fibrosis and on our CAR T program. So this slide talks a little bit about what fibrosis is and what we're hoping to do. Fibrosis is scarring. So this is the creation of scar tissue, usually in an internal organ. And you can imagine when that happens in a lung, as you can see in the top panel here. Normal lung is a very open airway structure, so that you get lots of gas exchange, oxygen and carbon dioxide. In a diseased or fibrotic lung, you see that open architecture is totally destroyed. And that results in significantly reduced lung function. And this is a response to inflammation and injury that gets out of control, and the body keeps laying down scar tissue. In the case of lung fibrosis, it's a progressive disease. What we're trying to do with 8214 is to reduce or slow that progression of fibrosis. So the bottom panel shows the impact of treating a mouse model of fibrotic lung disease with 8214. The left picture is a normal mouse lung. The middle picture shows a fibrotic lung, and the purple staining now is collagen, which makes scars stiff and pull. And the right picture shows a much more normal tissue architecture after treatment with AD214. And the next slide talks a little bit about our lead indication, which is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. This is a progressive, degenerative and fatal disease that kills most people less than 4 years after diagnosis. There's a $3 billion market today driven by 2 drugs that don't work particularly well. They slow progression but don't stop it, and they have debilitating side effects that prevent people continuing with therapy for more than about 12 months in many, many cases. This area is an orphan disease, what's called an orphan disease today. Unfortunately, as a result of COVID, it may no longer be an orphan disease because we now know that long COVID or severe acute respiratory distress syndrome leads to or is partly implicated with large incidence of fibrotic diseases in the lungs. So where are we up to with this program? On the next slide, we've completed a phase 1 program with an intravenous version of AD214, and this demonstrated that the drug was well tolerated and we bound to the target receptor, which we call CXCR4, in ways that encourage us that we can have a therapeutic impact. So this drug will be ready to move into phase 2. Our next material will only be available for phase 2 in the middle of 2023, and this is driven by COVID delays in supply chains for biologic drugs globally. So we're taking this opportunity to leverage some additional information we got from some preclinical imaging that showed that the bioavailability, i.e. the amount of drug that's available to the lungs of patients when administered intravenously, wasn't where we wanted it to be. We had a lot of it ending up in the liver. And so what we're now doing is developing an inhaled version of AD214 for lung fibrosis. We're considering an intravitreal injection for eye fibrosis, and we're continuing to work to improve the IV formulation for other indications such as kidney. And that's the work that we're really focused on at the moment, so that we go into phase 2 with a more convenient patient formulation of the drug that's a much lower cost of goods going forward, a much better product than we would have had if we continued with the IV version. On the next slide, you can see the initial results from the inhalation development studies. This is really the first key step, was to show that our drug could survive the process of turning it into an aerosol, which we have done, and more importantly, that we could make aerosol particles at sufficiently small size to get to the bottom and the far regions of the lungs, which is what's really important for treating idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And we now know that we can get 17, or simulations show we can get 17 to 46% of our delivered dose deposited in those far reaches of the lungs. We embarked on this program thinking 10% would be where we'd end up, and so this is a way better outcome than we'd initially modeled and expected. So this is great news. I'll talk about the next steps for AD214 later on, but I just want to reiterate that it's not just about lung fibrosis here. There are multiple multi-billion-dollar markets where fibrotic disease continues to be the largest unmet need, and they continues to be a big driver of progression. We're particularly interested in eye and kidney fibrosis, and we're doing some work on cancer as well at the moment. So we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to switch gears and talk about our CAR-T program briefly. For a recap for people who aren't familiar with this, cancer is really good at hiding from our immune system. So what we're doing with CAR-T cell therapy is removing cells from your immune system, genetically modifying them in the lab to be able to target the cancer by engineering in what's called a chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR molecule. They're expanded in the lab and given back to the patient. And now your immune system can go find cancer. We've given you a living drug, single dose, that can continue to survive and hunt down cancer forever. The first drugs were approved in 2017 for blood cancers, and this is projected to be a $20 billion market. The challenge for CAR-T therapies is translating the blood cancer successes to solid tumours, and this is what we're trying to do with our collaboration with Karuna Biotech. And what we're doing is putting antibodies that can bind to unique targets on cancer that traditional antibodies haven't been able to, and combining them in a way that we can hit multiple targets at once with cancer, what's called bispecifics. And that enables us to then target cancer more specifically and have a better shot at dealing with solid tumours without off-target side effects. The next slide shows the first experimental data showing that we can actually put an antibody into a CAR-T cell. We can achieve all our collaboration partner Karuna's manufacturing expectations, And we've ended up with cells that can kill 2 different colorectal cancer cell lines, the left and the middle panel, and can also have a crack at a brain cancer cell line on the right panel. The purple lines are all our iBody-enabled CAR T cells. The green ones are the T cells that haven't been modified to treat cancer. So this has given us great encouragement to move forward, and we're now working on our first target together, which we've just announced with Karina. Moving on to the next slide, these are our goals going forward. So for this year, it's all about those 3 programs that are most active at the moment. AD214, we've got a lot of milestones coming every quarter on the development of the inhaled formulation. And as we hit each one of those milestones, stability we've already hit, efficacy is ongoing at the moment in mouse models. Then we're doing dosing and distribution. Each of those milestones increases the attractiveness of this asset to partners. We've got a number of pharmaceutical companies looking at this asset, and we're hoping that as those data points come through in the next 1, 2, 3 quarters, that the partnering interest will ramp up and certainly accelerate those existing conversations. With GE Healthcare, the big milestone coming up is what we call preclinical proof of concept. This will be the ability to image granzyme B or an enzyme in mice that have been treated with immuno-oncology drugs. With Karina, we expect to get the first experimental results showing cell killing capability from our first target and to commence work on our second target as part of that collaboration. Remembering this is about a 5-target deal. And then we've got additional milestones around our internal pipeline development and investment in our platform. The next slide provides a little bit of a corporate snapshot. Tim covered this at the beginning, but about 25 million market cap today. The move to inhaled, while we see that as being absolutely important to providing a better outcome, did create a little bit of a surprise for some of our shareholders, which led to the share reduction in July. I would reiterate, we have a safe drug. It's ready for phase 2. We're going into phase 2 with a more superior formulation. And the final slide really is just to recap. Our iBody platform is capable of creating multiple sources of value, multiple assets over time. We have 4 assets in the pipeline already, ranging from clinical stage to discovery. We've got a clear picture to continue to expand that. The team is great. We haven't talked about them today, but we have a growing team driving the discovery process, and we've got a pretty clear news flow coming forward, so you can see us delivering on that plan. We look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thanks, Tim. I see you've got a very significant shareholder there in Platinum Asset Management. That'll be their healthcare fund. And now this is a complicated space for retail investors to understand. What are some of the short-term focuses or short-term milestones they should focus on?
So with AD214, which is our lead product, the next one to come will be, can we demonstrate that the inhalation of AD214 is effective in an animal model of lung fibrosis? We're working on a mouse model at the moment, and we have plans on a larger animal model as well, which may be more sensitive if we need it. So that's the next one coming up. And then after that, we're looking at imaging and distribution to see how long does the drug stay in the lungs, which helps us define a dose for phase 2. So all of that's in the next half.
And the milestones that Big Pharma are looking at from Adalta? Yeah,
so they wanted to see safety from phase 1, which we've now got. They're looking for exactly those same 2 milestones. So they're very interested. They believe if we can de-risk the program by demonstrating that we can get the drug where we need to and it's effective in the animal models, we've already demonstrated efficacy if we can get it to the right place. They know the drug is safe. That really starts to pique their interest. And we have a lot of interest, not just with global pharma, but also in regional pharma companies out of China who could become co-development partners and help us with non-dilutive funding for the overall phase 2 program.
And for a biotech company such as yourself, funding is always an issue. Can you talk through your capital position at the moment?
Yeah, so we had just over 6 million in the bank at the 30th of November. We raised 3.75 million going into Christmas. Our 4C will come out probably early next week, so it'll give you a complete update. But we've got in the vicinity of 10 million in the bank at the moment. We burn about 2 million a quarter. So that gives us room to get through those key milestones in the next 6 months and have strategic flexibility to not be pressured to do a deal, a capital raise or anything else immediately after that. So I think we're in really good shape at the moment from a funding of the core programs. We'd obviously like to be able to expand, but we want to do that off the back of a position of strength, not a position of where we are at the moment.
Understood, Tim. Thanks for your time. It's always good to hear from you. Good luck for 2022.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Lithium Australia, ASX code LIT, market cap around 133 million, 1 year return of minus 18%. We have with us Adrian Griffith, who is the Managing Director. The company, Lithium Australia, plans to create a circular battery economy, improving resource security in the process. So we'll hand over now to Adrian. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. I'll apologise in advance. There are a couple of legacy animations in this presentation. It'll be a little bit annoying, but let's move forward and we'll start off with this video.
Batteries power billions of devices, headphones, cameras, laptops, e-bikes, almost anything you don't need a cord for. But all those combined are a drop in the ocean compared to what electric vehicles need, which is why demand for lithium is predicted to outstrip supply by 2025. Other critical materials like cobalt are sourced from countries that don't care about the environment, don't care about human rights, and don't care about corruption, leading to ethical and supply chain issues. Lithium Australia is researching lithium ferrophosphate, a type of lithium-ion battery that doesn't require commodities from conflict zones. LFP is also safer, cheaper, and more efficient, and operates over a wider range of temperatures. Lithium Australia's proprietary processes offer a seamless pathway from the mining and refining of raw materials through to battery production, and finally, the recycling of spent batteries to create new ones, ensuring a more sustainable industry. Lithium Australia controls 4 distinct business divisions. The Raw Materials Division, which has investments in listed lithium explorers and equity ownership in lithium projects. The Lithium Chemicals Division, which has developed 2 novel processes, Silage and Lena, to improve the viability of existing mining operations and enhance energy security where conventional resources are scarce or non-existent. Silage extracts lithium from mine waste to deliver inexpensive lithium with a low energy footprint. Lena utilises fine or low-grade spodumene currently discarded by conventional lithium concentrate producers, which renders existing ore reserves more economical. The Batteries Division, which includes a pilot plant and lab-scale production and testing facilities that specialise in battery cathode materials, primarily LFP. Numerous patent applications are pending, and the nanotechnology has been awarded significant research grants by the Australian government. LFP is the fastest growing sector of the lithium-ion battery market, and with only 2% currently produced outside China, alternative sources will quickly become critical in securing a diverse global energy supply. And lastly, the Recycling Division, which collects, sorts and shreds spent batteries to recover critical materials for new battery production. With these 4 divisions, Lithium Australia leads the world in securing an ethical, secure and sustainable battery industry.
Okay, so that's what we're all about. To a large extent, it's a suite of patented technologies protected by international patents that effectively provide a smooth transition in every sector of the supply chain, minimising the number of process steps and, as a consequence, reducing the cost to the consumer. Next. I'll just take you very briefly through the various competing battery chemistries in the marketplace, and there are plenty of them, but most of them are nickel and cobalt based. And you'll see there on this spider diagram, the best attributes are on the outside, and the place you don't want to be is in the middle. NMC, which is nickel, manganese, cobalt, and the numbers on the end of those designations, 6:2 are the ratio. So it's 6 parts nickel, 2 parts manganese and 2 parts cobalt. You'll notice on that spider diagram, there are shortfalls in performance, particularly cycle life, problem with respect to exposure to cobalt and the cost of manufacturing that material. But if you go down to LFP, which is the thin green line, you'll notice that that in fact has very good cycle life. It's the optimum, high discharge rates, and no cobalt, of course. No thermal runaway, and as a consequence, exceedingly safe, but it does fall short in energy density. However, if you add a little bit of manganese, you can get most of that back and ultimately produce what's LFP on steroids. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've done exactly that, and we're one of the few companies in the world that's actually mastered the art of producing LFP, which we believe will be the next generation cathode powder because it has all of the attributes of LFP. It's cheap to make, long lasting, very, very safe, and of course competes with the others with respect to energy density when you add a bit of manganese to it. Next. And this is where we do it all in Queensland at our pilot facility at Wacol. That facility, incidentally, has been operating in one form or another now for 19 years. So it's not like we're newcomers to the business. And the last 12 years of that is focused on LFP. Next. Forward. Thanks very much. So looking at LFP on an international basis, it's interesting that 98% of it's produced in China. It's the most rapidly advancing part of the battery world, now commands 52% of battery chemistries, and only 2% of that, of course, as I mentioned, produced outside China. That creates a fantastic opportunity, particularly when you're protected by international patents, because LFP will go global and is going global with the likes of Tesla, Ford, Stellantis, VW and others. So the company has committed to a definitive feasibility study, which has commenced. But I think it's worth noting the areas that we've been testing. Next. And we've been testing for a long period of time, 5 years, producing commercial format cells in Japan and China. But in the last 12 months, as a consequence of the renewed interest in LFP, we've started testing in South Korea, Israel, France, UK, and Canada. Next. So in addition to the production of battery materials, we have upstream and downstream processes, as mentioned in that video. And in particular EnviroStream, which is the only licensed recycler of lithium-ion batteries in Australia, and very well set given that there's a stewardship scheme that was implemented this month in Australia, which provides a levy on batteries at the point of sale and returns the funds raised from that levy to the parties collecting, sorting and processing batteries. And of course, we cover the whole of that supply chain with EnviroStream. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got some of the upstream technology. The example here is Lena, which recovers lithium from waste spodumene, fine and contaminated materials, and does that without roasting. That's most important, has a very low thermal footprint. As a consequence, environmentally a bit more sensitive than current processing technologies to achieve the same thing. We are currently building a pilot plant at ANSTO, the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation in Sydney. That's been slowed down, unfortunately, a little bit as a consequence of COVID. However, all the components are on site and assembly is going ahead. We anticipate that'll probably be complete towards the end of next month. Next. Briefly on the raw materials, we had a significant raw materials exploration, if you like, portfolio. We've farmed most of that out. That's gone to a number of public companies. We own equity in those public companies, two of the most prominent ones, Galan Lithium and Charger Metals. And we also retain between 20 and 30% free carry on the projects that we vended. And as a consequence, we've got 20% interest in Greenbushes South, which is managed by Galan Lithium, 30% in Bino in Northern Territory, which incidentally has produced some rather spectacular exploration results over the last few weeks. Lake Johnson, 30% interest there. And Coates, which is really a Julimar lookalike, not far from Perth. In fact, one of the great attributes of Julimar is it's close to Perth, but Coates is about 18 kilometres south of Julimar, so it's even closer to Perth, has geochemical signatures that are an absolute dead ringer. So the great thing about the raw materials division as we have it today is we've got no exploration expenditure, we've got no exposure to exploration failure, and we've got all of the upside in terms of equity in the public companies running those programs and direct project equity. Next. So in summary, Lithium Australia is one of the few companies around the world that is outside China that is heavily exposed to LFP, and indeed the only company on the ASX that has LFP exposure. And what's more, of course, we have produced the LFP on steroids, LMFP, and probably the only, certainly one of a handful, if there are others, of companies that have perfected that, either inside or outside China. That puts us in a great position as the market globally pushes towards the chemistries that don't have nickel and cobalt and have much safer attributes and lower cost. All of this protected by international patents. And then, of course, at end of battery life, into EnviroStream, the only lithium-ion battery recycler in Australia, soon to be the beneficiary of the Battery Stewardship Scheme, which started this month. So I think we're in a pretty good position across the board with respect to battery materials. And as I mentioned, the only company on the ASX with direct focus on LFP. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. A couple of questions here. Can you give us a little bit more colour on the market globally for LFP?
Certainly. I think it's interesting to see the increase in production on a monthly basis inside China at the moment is around about 30%. So it's rapidly eclipsed the nickel and cobalt based batteries, and the installed capacity, which is not all brought online at this stage, I might add, but the additional installed capacity in China last year was over 400%. You've got Tesla converting all of their entry-level models to LFP, VW doing the same, Ford doing exactly the same. And you might be intrigued to note that the biggest selling model of EV in the United States, in fact, is not Tesla, it's the Ford F100, and that will be going LFP. So the market's expanding very rapidly. There's very limited production outside China. The limited production outside China has been a consequence of past patents, intellectual property that has prevented that from happening outside China. Most of that has fallen away in the last 12 months, not everywhere. It hasn't fallen away in North America. And we effectively have replaced it with the intellectual property that we've got. So we're very well positioned there for an expanding LFP market.
And do you have to have your product qualified by some of the names that you've spoken about?
Yeah, you certainly do. And that product qualification generally takes a couple of years, but I've got to say we've been well advanced with respect to doing that sort of thing, in that we have been testing commercial format cells in China now with DLG Battery, one of the LFP battery producers, and we've been doing that for 5 years.
And is there, given you across that whole battery chain and you're talking about exporting, what's the local environment look like for Australia in terms of the EV battery?
I think that the local environment from a technical point of view looks really good. What it could badly do with is a bit more government support to kickstart the industry. You know, we've got everything that's required here in Western Australia, but typical of the Australian attitude, we haven't developed the downstream manufacturing. There's an enormous amount of interest. There are a couple of junior players getting into that, both in Western Australia and Queensland, but I really think it requires good government policy and perhaps a little bit of financial support from the government.
I noticed there's a couple of clean energy sort of government commercials on TV these days. Must be heading into election, hey, Adrian?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And I'm not going to get sucked into that one. I could certainly make a few comments, but not today.
Okay, I'll steer you away from that direction. There's a question here with the battery stewardship scheme commencing shortly. Could you talk through how EnviroStream will benefit from this scheme?
Yeah, certainly. The stewardship scheme has actually commenced. It commenced on the 1st of January. It's not fully implemented. What it does is charges a levy on batteries at the point of sale. And that levy, if you look at a AA cell, for example, that levy is about 4 cents. So the consumer doesn't even notice it. The money then goes back to the Battery Stewardship Council, and then the Battery Stewardship Council divvies up those funds to the certified collectors, sorters and recyclers. Now, if you take a AA battery and look at 4 cents for a levy on that, it's equivalent to roughly $4,500 a tonne. And we, of course, have involvement in the entire supply chain. So if you look at a situation where today we process a lithium-ion battery and the materials that you recover out of that around about break even at the sort of volumes that we're dealing with. Those volumes are pretty low, I might add, and will expand dramatically as the stewardship scheme takes full force. But today's volume, that's around about break even selling materials you recover. Those materials are worth something like $2,000 a tonne. Well, if you take the levies for collection, sorting and separation, add that to the $2,000 a tonne, you can do the sums yourself. It looks pretty bloody attractive.
And I mean, your share price has underperformed at a time when, you know, every headline in the paper is around the EV battery space. Have you got some colour on that?
It's a really interesting comment, and I think one of the things you need to appreciate is we're not a lithium producer. So the companies that you're referring to are primarily lithium explorers and lithium producers, and where not ultimately our biggest exposure will be the production of lithium chemicals and lithium battery precursors in LFP and LMFP. And of course, the cost of lithium there is an input cost, not an output cost. So if you look at the way our price runs, we've actually run pretty much in parallel with the LFP price, which makes a lot of sense because that's what our business is to a large extent.
And what has that LFP price looked like recently?
I think if you go back 12 months internally in China, and we can only take China as being an example because it is 98% of the market. But if you look at it over the last 12 months, it was about $8 a kilogram. There's a broad range of different prices in that marketplace. So what I'm saying is a fairly broad brush approach, but it's gone from about $8 to about $14 with recent price rises starting from about November of last year. I think on a global market and get outside China, the prices are more like $20 because the supply is so short. And the reason the supply is short is the Chinese market is expanding so rapidly that all of the LFP powder that is produced on the Chinese market gets consumed in domestic battery production. There's nothing left for anyone else. And the market is expanding faster than you can produce it. So we're really get into a position where the supply chains are streamlined and things don't go into China and back out of China. And that's really what we're focused on. And we're focused on LFP production outside China.
And of course, there's been an emphasis on kind of the US in particular kind of owning their own battery chains or supply chain. Is there a focus on the US for you with this product?
We certainly believe that the US market is probably the sleeping giant because the Biden battery blueprint dictates that domestic supply chains have to be developed. So it's not an option. At the moment, they all go through China. So they will have to develop an LFP market in North America. And we're looking at that under extreme focus, shall we say.
Thanks, Adrian. Really interesting story. Good luck for 2022. We'd love to have you back on in the middle of the year. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Tim. Been a pleasure.
That's all we have time for, everyone. Welcome back to this ShareCafe webinar series. We've got a lot more ahead. We'll see you next week.